Banff National Park, December 12, 2009. The mercury hovered at minus 15 degrees Celsius as Kevin Harlow, 25, and Melissa Turner, 23, pulled their compact trailer into the Whiskey Jack campground. The site was nearly empty. Most tourists preferred the warmth of Banff's lodges during winter, leaving the campgrounds to hardier souls. Kevin, an environmental science student with a growing portfolio of wildlife photography, had been planning this trip for months. Melissa, studying conservation biology at the University of British Columbia, shared his passion for the natural world. The couple had been dating for 3 years and had recently begun discussing marriage. They were inseparable, recalled Linda Harlow, Kevin's mother, in a 2010 interview. Kevin would call me every Sunday, and half the time he'd be telling me about some plant Melissa had identified or some research paper she was writing. They just completed each other. At 4:17 p.m. on December 12th, Kevin sent a selfie to his parents showing him and Melissa bundled in down jackets, snow-capped peaks rising behind them. The message read, "Made it to paradise." Both were smiling, their cheeks reddened by the cold. Melissa's long auburn hair peeked out from beneath a knitted hat, a Christmas gift from her sister Claire the previous year. It would be the last communication anyone would receive from either of them. 3 days passed without word. On December 15th, Sandra Turner, Melissa's mother, tried calling her daughter. The call went straight to voicemail. She texted, then called again an hour later. Nothing. Growing concerned, she phoned Linda Harlow, who reported the same silence from Kevin. "At first, we thought maybe they were just out of cell range," Sandra later explained. "The reception up there can be spotty." But Kevin had promised to check in every evening when they returned to their trailer. After the second day of silence, we knew something was wrong. On December 16th, both families contacted the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. Sergeant Thomas Wilson took the report with immediate concern. Winter in Banff was no place for inexperienced hikers to go missing. Within hours, a search and rescue operation mobilized, focusing on the Whiskey Jack campground and surrounding trails. Park Ranger Elizabeth Dawson was first to locate their trailer, undisturbed in Campsite 18. "Everything was neat as a pin," she noted in her official report. "Beds made, dishes washed and put away, no signs of disturbance. Their car was locked and parked properly. It looked like they'd stepped out for a short hike and planned to return. But several critical items were missing. 2 backpacks, Kevin's professional camera equipment, warm weather gear, a small tent, and a handheld GPS device that Kevin's father had given him for Christmas the previous year. The GPS, a high-end Garmin with tracking capabilities, had been Kevin's pride and joy. He logged every hike, every elevation change, his father would later recall. That boy didn't take a step in the wilderness without mapping it. A light snow had fallen the night before the search began, covering any tracks that might have led away from the trailer. As park authorities expanded their search, the weather worsened. A winter storm swept through the Rockies on December 18th, dropping 8 inches of fresh snow and sending temperatures plummeting to minus 25 degrees Celsius. Visibility dropped to near zero, forcing the search teams to temporarily retreat. Dr. Alan Northcutt, Director of Emergency Services for Banff National Park, faced the cameras on December 20th, his expression grim. "We have over 40 personnel searching, plus canine units and helicopter support when weather permits. But I need to be clear about the conditions we're facing. This is extremely challenging terrain under the best circumstances. With the recent snowfall and temperatures, our window of opportunity is closing rapidly." What Dr. Northcutt didn't explicitly state, but what everyone understood, was that survival times in such conditions were measured in hours, not days. Unless Kevin and Melissa had found shelter, the chances of finding them alive diminished with each passing hour. The search expanded to cover a 20-square-kilometer area around the campsite, focusing on trails that Kevin and Melissa might have taken. Particular attention was paid to a remote area known as Granite Canyon, a favorite among photographers for its dramatic vistas, but notorious among rangers for its treacherous footing and avalanche risk. Kevin had mentioned wanting to photograph Granite Canyon at sunrise. Linda Harlow told searchers, clutching a dog-eared map of the park. He'd seen photos online and said the light there was magical in winter. Search teams combed the canyon but found no trace of the missing couple. No equipment, no clothing, no indication they had ever been there. As Christmas approached, the official search contracted, shifting from rescue to recovery. The families, unwilling to abandon hope, hired private search specialists to continue, but deep snow and continuing storms hampered their efforts. By January 15, 2010, the active search was officially suspended. Park officials delivered the devastating news to the families at the Banff Emergency Operations Center. "We've exhausted all reasonable search options," Sergeant Wilson explained, his voice heavy with regret. "We've covered every trail, drainage, and accessible backcountry area within a feasible radius." At this point, we have to acknowledge that Kevin and Melissa likely succumbed to exposure. But what had happened to them? With no bodies recovered, questions lingered. Theories emerged, each more plausible than the families wanted to admit. Wildlife biologist Dr. Michael Forrester, a 30-year veteran of the Park Service specializing in large predator behavior, offered the theory that would eventually become the official position. Banff is home to approximately 65 grizzly bears, plus black bears, wolves, and mountain lions. While predatory attacks on humans are rare, they do happen, particularly if the animal is surprised or if the humans inadvertently come between a mother and her cubs. Dr. Forrester explained that grizzlies, though typically in hibernation by December, sometimes remain active during mild early winters. The winter of 2009 had been unusually warm until mid-December. We had trail camera footage of a large male grizzly, known to rangers as Old Boss, active in the eastern quadrant as late as December 5th. It's entirely possible this bear was still foraging when Kevin and Melissa ventured out. The predation theory gained traction as the most logical explanation. A bear attack would explain the complete absence of evidence. A large predator might carry victims considerable distances, and scavengers would eliminate most remains by spring thaw. The theory also aligned with statistical data. Since 1967, Banff and the surrounding parks had recorded 14 fatal bear attacks. For Robert Thornton, head of Banff's tourism department, the case needed resolution, preferably one that wouldn't further damage the park's reputation. In early February, he began subtly pressing for official closure. "While this tragedy has touched all of us deeply," he stated in a memo to park administration, "maintaining an open missing persons case indefinitely creates an impression of ongoing danger that doesn't reflect the reality of Banff's safety record." The memo, later obtained through a Freedom of Information request, continued, "I recommend reclassifying this as a presumed wildlife incident, which accurately reflects the most likely scenario while allowing us to appropriately memorialize these young people and begin the healing process for the families and for our community." Not everyone was convinced. Claire Turner, Melissa's 29-year-old sister, became increasingly vocal about her dissatisfaction with the investigation. An environmental lawyer from Vancouver, Claire possessed the same methodical mind as her sister, coupled with a fierce determination that some described as obstinance. "The predation theory is convenient," she told a local reporter in March. "It requires no further investigation. It demands no accountability. And it plays into our collective fear of the wild, making it easy to accept. But where's the evidence? No blood, no torn clothing, no tracks, nothing." Claire's questions proved difficult to answer. If a predator had attacked, why was there no evidence at all? Even in cases where bodies weren't recovered, bear attacks typically left some trace blood, torn clothing, or tracks. The complete absence of evidence troubled her. She pointed to other possibilities: disorientation in a sudden storm, falling through ice into one of the area's many lakes, or even foul play. "I'm not saying I know what happened," Claire clarified. "I'm saying no one knows. And until we have something concrete, calling this a bear attack is premature." Her persistence created tension within her own family. Sandra and Thomas Turner, exhausted by grief and the emotional roller coaster of the search, began to pull away from their daughter's campaign for answers. "We just want to remember our little girl," Sandra confided to a family friend. "Claire won't let us grieve. Every time we start to accept what happened, she comes with a new theory, a new reason to hope, or a new reason to be angry. It's tearing us apart." By March, Claire stood increasingly alone in her refusal to accept the wildlife predation theory. She took a leave of absence from her law firm and moved temporarily to Banff, renting a small cabin on the outskirts of town. She began meticulously reconstructing her sister's final days, interviewing anyone who might have seen Kevin and Melissa. The owner of a small grocery in Banff remembered them buying supplies. Such a nice couple. He carried all the bags while she checked their list twice. Very organized young lady. Said they were planning to be out on trails for most of their stay. Wanted to make sure they had everything they needed. A barista at Mountain Brew Coffee recalled Kevin asking about photography locations. He was excited about catching the northern lights. Said they were planning to hike up to Monarch Viewpoint. I remember warning him about the weather forecast. These mundane interactions offered Claire nothing substantive, but she recorded everything, creating a detailed timeline on a large map pinned to her cabin wall. The map became her obsession, covered in sticky notes, photographs, and red string connecting possible routes and sightings. In April, Claire's meticulous work uncovered something the official investigation had missed. A backcountry camper had reported seeing two hikers matching Kevin and Melissa's description on the morning of December 13th, heading toward Sawback Range, the opposite direction from Granite Canyon, where search efforts had concentrated. Claire immediately brought this information to Sergeant Wilson, who reluctantly agreed to send a small team to search the area once weather permitted. The search, conducted in late April after significant snowmelt, yielded nothing. As spring transformed the landscape, revealing ground that had been hidden beneath snow for months, hope briefly resurged that some trace of Kevin and Melissa might emerge. Park rangers added the case to their seasonal briefings, asking all personnel to remain vigilant for any unusual findings as they patrolled thawing backcountry. Nothing appeared. Tourism season approached, and Banff prepared for the annual influx of visitors. Robert Thornton's department launched a new marketing campaign highlighting the park's safety measures and visitor resources. Posters featuring smiling hikers against spectacular mountain backdrops appeared in visitor centers and on promotional websites. The disappearance of Kevin and Melissa, barely 5 months old, began fading from public consciousness. On June 7, 2010, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police officially classified the case as presumed fatality due to environmental exposure or wildlife encounter. The classification, while acknowledging some uncertainty, effectively closed the active investigation. Sergeant Wilson personally delivered the notification to both families. To the Harlows, he offered the small comfort of statistical probability. All evidence points to a tragic accident in the backcountry. While we may never know exactly what happened, our experience tells us that when hikers disappear in these conditions, exposure or wildlife encounters are almost always responsible. To the Turners, gathered in their Vancouver home, his words were similarly practiced. Without remains, we can't make an absolute determination. But after exhaustive investigation, we found no evidence of foul play or intentional disappearance. All indications suggest Kevin and Melissa were victims of the wilderness itself. Sandra Turner wept quietly while her husband Thomas signed the acknowledgement form. Claire refused, walking out of the room before Sergeant Wilson finished his prepared statement. From the porch, she heard her father apologizing for her behavior. "She's taking it harder than most," Thomas explained. "Melissa was more than a sister to her. They were best friends. Claire just needs more time." But time wasn't what Claire needed. She needed answers that aligned with her understanding of her sister, a meticulous planner who respected nature but never feared it blindly. Melissa had completed wilderness survival training during her sophomore year. Kevin had been hiking since childhood. They weren't reckless tourists who would wander unprepared into dangerous territory. That evening, alone in her rented cabin, Claire stared at her map of possible routes and scenarios. The official explanation felt wrong in ways she couldn't articulate. It wasn't just denial or grief, though both clouded her judgment at times. Something about the case didn't fit the narrative authorities had constructed. Outside her window, the Canadian Rockies stood silhouetted against the darkening sky, beautiful and indifferent. Somewhere in that vastness lay the truth about what happened to Melissa and Kevin. Claire made a silent promise to her sister that night she would find that truth, no matter how long it took or what it might reveal. She couldn't know then that the answer would come from the wilderness itself in a form no one expected, nor that the truth would prove far darker than the explanation everyone had accepted. She couldn't know that her search would lead her not into the harsh indifference of nature, but into the calculated malevolence of a human predator who had been hiding in plain sight all along. The mountains kept their secret for 3 more years. April 14, 2013. Dr. Michael Forrester trudged through melting snow in the eastern sector of Banff National Park, collecting samples for his annual study of post-hibernation bear feeding patterns. The 60-year-old biologist had been conducting this research for over 2 decades, tracking how climate change affected hibernation periods and spring foraging behavior. The morning was crisp but warming, typical of mid-April in the Rockies. Spring came late at these elevations. The transition from winter marked by sudden temperature swings and unpredictable storms. Dr. Forrester had dressed in layers, ready to peel them off as the day warmed. He stooped to examine a fresh pile of bear-scat valuable data for his study. Using a small trowel, he carefully collected the sample into a sterile container, noting its composition, primarily early spring vegetation with fragments of winter-killed elk, consistent with a bear recently emerged from hibernation. As he prepared to seal the container, something unusual caught his eye: a small, rectangular object embedded in the excrement. Using tweezers, he extracted what appeared to be a damaged electronic device roughly the size of a deck of cards. Though partially crushed and corroded, its purpose was unmistakable: a handheld GPS unit. Dr. Forrester photographed the device in situ before carefully placing it in a separate evidence bag. Any human artifact found in bearscat warranted documentation, both for scientific purposes and because such discoveries occasionally connected to missing persons cases. Back at his field station that evening, he cleaned the device enough to locate a serial number, then made a call to the RCMP office in Banff. The call set in motion a chain of events that would resurrect a case many had been all too willing to forget. The call from Dr. Forrester reached Sergeant Thomas Wilson's desk on a quiet Monday afternoon. Wilson, now in his 19th year with the RCMP, had handled dozens of disappearances in the Canadian wilderness. The Harlow Turner case had never sat quite right with him, though he'd never admit it publicly. The complete absence of evidence had been unusual, even for the vast expanse of Banff. When Forrester described his discovery, Wilson felt a strange mixture of vindication and unease. "I'll need you to bring that device in immediately," Wilson instructed, "and I'd appreciate your discretion until we've had a chance to examine it." The partially damaged GPS arrived at the RCMP station by noon the following day. Despite exposure to digestive acids and mechanical damage, the unit's hardened case had protected its internal components surprisingly well. The station's technology specialist, Constable Leanne Mercer, extracted the device's serial number and confirmed what they suspected. It had been registered to Kevin Harlow in 2008. "It's his," Wilson confirmed, staring at the battered device now sealed in an evidence bag. "We need to notify the families, but let's be certain about what we're telling them." The discovery rippled through Banff's tight-knit law enforcement community. For most, it represented closure physical evidence confirming the wildlife predation theory that had become the accepted narrative. Robert Thornton, now promoted to Director of Regional Tourism, seized the opportunity to frame the discovery as a teaching moment. This tragic confirmation reminds all visitors to respect wildlife safety protocols, he told the Banff Sentinel, barely concealing his relief at having the case definitively closed. The park has implemented enhanced tracking of known predators and improved warning systems since 2009. News outlets across Canada picked up the story. Mystery solved. Bear attack confirmed in 2009 Banff disappearance, read the headline in the Calgary Herald. Television reports featured stock footage of grizzlies, experts discussing predator behavior, and somber warnings about wilderness safety. For the Harlow family, the discovery brought a complicated grief pain refreshed but tempered by certainty. "At least now we know," Kevin's father told reporters gathered outside their Edmonton home. "We can finally begin to accept what happened." For Claire Turner, working late in her Vancouver law office, the news arrived via text message from her mother. "They found Kevin's GPS inside a bear. It's over, Claire. Please come home." The simplification wasn't technically accurate. The device had been found in excrement, not inside the animal, but the implication was clear enough. Nature had finally provided the evidence everyone had been seeking. The case that had consumed 3 years of Claire's life appeared resolved, the answer as brutal as it was straightforward. She should have felt something relief, perhaps, or the crushing weight of finality. Instead, she felt a persistent uneasiness, the same instinctive doubt that had driven her investigation from the beginning. Claire took an emergency leave from her firm and was on a flight to Calgary the next morning. From there, she drove the familiar route to Banff. The April landscape vastly different from the snow-covered terrain she'd searched years earlier. Spring had brought the mountains to life, patches of wildflowers dotted meadows where snow had recently melted, and the crystalline lake's reflected peaks still capped with white. Her first stop wasn't the RCMP station, but the research outpost where Dr. Forrester maintained his laboratory. The biologist seemed surprised by her arrival but welcomed her into the cluttered space filled with specimen containers, microscopes, and topographical maps marked with colored pins indicating wildlife sightings. "I expected you'd want to see where I found it," he said, unfolding a detailed map of the eastern quadrant. He indicated a location approximately 8 kilometers from the Whiskey Jack campground in an area known as Wolverine Ridge. "The bear in question is one we've been tracking for years, tagged male, approximately 12 years old. We call him Old Boss because of his territorial dominance." Claire studied the map, her brow furrowed. "This area wasn't part of the initial search perimeter." "No," Forrester agreed. "It's beyond what would be considered a reasonable day hike from their campsite, especially in December conditions." "Then why would they be there?" Claire asked, more to herself than to Forrester. The biologist cleared his throat. "Ms. Turner, I understand this is difficult, but sometimes in nature—" "I've heard all the theories, Doctor," Claire interrupted. "What I need now are facts. May I see the device?" The RCMP has it now," Forrester explained, "but I took photographs before turning it over." He opened a folder on his computer, displaying images of the damaged GPS unit covered in partially digested matter. "You can see the impact damage here and here," he pointed, "consistent with powerful jaws crushing it." Claire leaned closer, studying the images with the same intensity she'd applied to legal briefs throughout her career. "Was anything else found? Clothing fragments? Other equipment?" "No, just the GPS." which isn't surprising. Bears typically don't consume synthetic materials. This was likely attached to a pack or clothing that was torn during ... double quotes. He paused, recognizing the pain his clinical assessment might cause. Claire nodded, acknowledging his sensitivity. Do you find it odd that only this one item was recovered? After 3 years? Forrester hesitated. Not necessarily. Predator scat degrades quickly in this environment. This discovery was ... fortunate. Fortunate, Claire repeated, the word tasting bitter. May I ask you something, Dr. Forrester? In your professional opinion, how likely is it that a grizzly would attack two healthy adults traveling together? The biologist shifted uncomfortably. Unprovoked predatory attacks are rare, especially on groups. Most attacks occur when bears are surprised at close range or when protecting cubs or food sources. And would an attack typically leave no trace? No blood, no clothing scraps, nothing at the site? That's less common, Forrester admitted. But if the attack occurred away from trails and deep wilderness, evidence could be quickly obscured by weather or scavengers. Claire thanked him for his time, but as she turned to leave, Forrester called after her. Ms. Turner, I've studied these animals for 30 years. They're magnificent creatures, but they're also wild predators. Sometimes ... Sometimes nature doesn't give us the clean answers we want. It was the same platitude she'd heard countless times, yet something in Forrester's delivery felt genuine. She nodded and stepped out into the mountain air, uncertain of her next move but unwilling to simply accept the narrative being presented. At the RCMP station, Sergeant Wilson received her with professional courtesy, thinly masking his wariness. The Harlow Turner case file sat open on his desk, the recovered GPS unit in its evidence bag positioned prominently atop a stack of reports. I understand you have questions, Wilson began, gesturing for her to sit. I want to be clear that we're treating this as significant evidence, not as a definitive conclusion. Claire appreciated his precision, so different from the media's oversimplification. I'd like to see the analysis of the device. What data was recovered? Wilson slid a report across the desk. The internal memory was compromised by digestive acids, but our tech team managed to extract some location data. The last recorded coordinates matched the area where Dr. Forrester found the device. Claire studied the report, noting the timestamps. This shows the last recorded position at 10:17 a.m. on December 13, 2009. That's the morning after they arrived at the campground. Yes, Wilson confirmed, which suggests they set out early for a day hike and encountered the bear in that area, 8 kilometers from their campsite, in the opposite direction from where the search focused, Claire noted. Why would they go there? Neither Kevin nor Melissa mentioned Wolverine Ridge in any of their plans. Wilson leaned back in his chair. Hikers change plans. Perhaps they heard about a view, or Kevin wanted a specific shot for his photography. The explanation was plausible yet unsatisfying. Claire pressed further. Has the area been searched now that we know they were there? We sent a team yesterday. Nothing was found, which, after 3 years of weather and wildlife activity, isn't surprising. Claire fell silent, processing the information. The evidence pointed clearly toward the animal attack theory, yet something still felt wrong. The timing, the location, the condition of the device individually, each element made sense, but together they created a picture that seemed oddly convenient. I'd like to visit the location, she finally said. Wilson's expression tightened. Ms. Turner, I understand your need for closure, but that area is remote and potentially dangerous. The spring thaw makes for unstable terrain, and the bear population is active now. I've hiked these mountains for 3 years searching for my sister, Claire replied, her voice steady. I'll take appropriate precautions. Wilson recognized the determination in her eyes, the same unwavering resolve he'd seen when she first arrived in Banff after the disappearance. He sighed and pulled out a topographical map, marking the location where the GPS had been found. Take the Eastern Trail from Cascade Junction. It's a 6-hour round trip in good conditions. Register your hike with the visitor center, carry bear spray, and don't go alone." He hesitated, then added, "For what it's worth, Ms. Turner, I believe this confirms what happened to your sister and Kevin. Sometimes the simplest explanation is the truth." Claire left the station with the coordinates and a hollow feeling in her chest. The evidence was compelling, yet her instincts, the same instincts that had made her a successful environmental lawyer, told her something wasn't right. At the Banff Springs Hotel bar that evening, Claire sat alone reviewing her notes when a man approached her table. "Claire Turner?" he asked, his voice gentle yet confident. "I'm David Lawson. I was part of the search team back in 2009. Claire vaguely recognized him, a local doctor who had volunteered with the search and rescue operation. In his mid-40s, with salt and pepper hair and the weathered face of someone who spent considerable time outdoors, Lawson had the calm demeanor of a man accustomed to crisis. "I heard you were back in town," he continued. "I wanted to offer my condolences about the GPS discovery. It must be difficult having everything brought back to the surface." Claire gestured for him to join her. "Thank you, Dr. Lawson. Actually, I could use a local perspective. Something about this discovery doesn't feel right to me." Lawson ordered coffee, declining alcohol with a casual mention of being on call at the regional clinic. "I've had the same thought," he admitted, lowering his voice. "The timing is convenient." Claire leaned forward, surprised to find someone sharing her skepticism. "What do you mean?" "The Park Service has been pushing for increased funding for their predator tracking program. A confirmed bear attack supports their budget requests," he shrugged. "I'm not suggesting a conspiracy, but institutions protect their interests." "What about the GPS itself?" Claire asked. "Does it make sense that only that item would be found after all this time?" Lawson considered the question carefully. "It's unusual. In my years with search and rescue, I've seen animal attacks. They're messy. Belongings get scattered. And electronics rarely survive digestive systems intact enough to extract data." For the first time in days, Claire felt the fog of doubt lifting. Here was someone who understood her concerns without dismissing them as denial or grief. "I'm planning to hike to the location tomorrow," she said. "Would you be willing to come along? I could use someone familiar with the area." Lawson seemed momentarily surprised by the invitation but quickly nodded. "I have the morning free. We should start early. Weather's supposed to turn by afternoon." They agreed to meet at first light, and Claire returned to her hotel room feeling a renewed sense of purpose. In David Lawson, she'd found an unexpected ally, someone with both local knowledge and professional skepticism. The hike to Wolverine Ridge began under clear skies, the morning air crisp with the scent of pine and melting snow. Lawson proved to be an ideal companion, knowledgeable about the terrain and respectful of Claire's need to process the situation in her own way. He pointed out animal tracks, identifying moose, elk, and yes, bear prints in the muddy trail. "Black bear," he noted, indicating the size and shape of the paw print. "Probably a 2-year-old. Grizzlies leave wider prints with less distinct claw marks." The trail grew steeper as they approached the coordinates where the GPS had been found. The forest thinned, giving way to rocky outcroppings and meadows where early spring wildflowers had begun to emerge. "This is Grizzly country," Lawson explained as they paused to rest. "They prefer these open areas where they can dig for roots and tubers after hibernation." Claire surveyed the landscape, trying to imagine Kevin and Melissa here in December snow. "It's beautiful," she admitted, "but it makes no sense. This is at least 8 kilometers from their campsite through difficult terrain. Why would they come here on their first full day without telling anyone about their plans?" Lawson seemed to consider her question seriously. Kevin was a photographer. Maybe he heard about the views from this ridge. The lighting at sunrise would be spectacular. Claire shook her head. Kevin documented everything. He had online forums where he discussed photography locations. He wrote about every place he planned to visit on this trip. This area was never mentioned. They reached the approximate location where Dr. Forrester had discovered the GPS. Ridge offered a panoramic view of the surrounding valleys and distant peaks, indeed, a photographer's dream. But to Claire, it still felt wrong. As Lawson surveyed the area with practiced eyes, Claire knelt to examine the ground. April thaw had turned much of the soil to mud, revealing layers that had been frozen for months. She noticed something peculiar, a depression approximately 2 meters long, partially filled with water from melted snow. "Dr. Lawson," she called, "does this look natural to you?" He joined her, studying the oblong depression. His expression changed subtly. "This could be where an animal bedded down," he suggested, but his tone lacked conviction. "Or where something or someone was buried during the winter," Claire countered. The ground would have been frozen solid in December, difficult to dig, but not impossible. Lawson straightened, scanning the surrounding area with renewed attention. "That's a serious allegation, Claire. You're suggesting this wasn't an animal attack, but a deliberate act by a human." "I'm suggesting we consider all possibilities," Claire replied. "The official explanation has too many inconsistencies." They spent another hour searching the immediate area, finding nothing conclusive. As promised, the weather began to change by early afternoon, dark clouds gathering over the western peaks. They started back down the trail just as the first raindrops fell. "I have contacts at the Provincial Forensics Lab," Lawson said as they hiked. "I could ask them to take a closer look at the GPS device, check for evidence that might have been overlooked." Claire glanced at him, surprised by the offer. "Why would you do that?" "Most people think I'm just a grieving sister who can't accept reality." Lawson's pace slowed. "Because I was there during the original search. I saw how quickly the authorities settled on the bear attack theory, how easily certain questions were dismissed." He paused. "And because I've treated hikers injured by bears. The patterns don't match what we're being told happened here. Back in Banff." Claire expanded her investigation beyond the GPS discovery. She requested the original search records, interviewed park rangers who had participated, and created a detailed timeline of the December 2009 search efforts. Lawson provided invaluable assistance, using his local connections to access records that might otherwise have remained sealed. A pattern emerged that Claire found disturbing. The initial search had been thorough but strictly contained within areas that matched the couple's stated plans. When Claire had suggested expanding to Wolverine Ridge in 2010, based on a backcountry camper's possible sighting, her request had been noted but effectively ignored. The report says resource allocation prioritized to high-probability areas, Claire read from a document Lawson had obtained. But they never explained why Wolverine was considered low probability. "Budget constraints," Lawson suggested. Or perhaps someone didn't want that area searched. The implication hung in the air between them, neither willing to fully articulate the suspicion taking shape, that someone might have deliberately misdirected the search. Claire's presence in Banff did not go unnoticed. 3 days after her visit to Wolverine Ridge, she returned to her hotel room to find it had been searched. Nothing was taken, but her notes were slightly rearranged. Her laptop moved from where she'd left it. The hotel manager was apologetic but confused. "No staff entered your room today, Ms. Turner. Housekeeping was instructed to skip it per your request." That evening, a note appeared under her door, a single typed line. "Some questions are better left unasked." Claire brought the note to Sergeant Wilson, who took it seriously but cautioned against overreaction. "This could be someone's misguided attempt to help you move on," he suggested. "But we'll look into it." Her parents called daily, increasingly concerned about her renewed obsession with the case. "The GPS confirms what happened, Claire," her father argued during one difficult conversation. "Coming back to Banff, stirring everything up again, it's not healthy." "What if it wasn't a bear, Dad?" Claire finally asked. "What if someone wanted us to think it was?" The silence that followed was heavy with her father's concern for her mental state. "Claire, honey, please come home. We're worried about you." Despite the pressure, Claire continued her investigation, now focused on a new angle. Who might have had opportunity and motive to harm Kevin and Melissa, then cover it up as a wildlife attack? Through methodical research, she identified several persons of interest. Jackson Brooks, a local guide known for his territorial attitude toward his photography locations, who had argued with Kevin in town. Carl Whitman, a park ranger who had been fired shortly after the disappearance for unrelated misconduct. And Robert Thornton, whose tourism department had benefited from the clean resolution of the case as a natural tragedy. Claire approached Brooks first, finding him at the Elk and Whistle, a bar popular with local guides. Initially hostile, Brooks became defensive when Claire mentioned Kevin by name. "Yeah, I remember that guy," he admitted after his third whiskey. "Photography student, thought he knew everything. Wanted locations I spent years finding." His eyes narrowed. "I told him to find his own spots. That doesn't make me responsible for whatever happened. Did you see him after that argument?" Claire pressed. "No." Brooks drained his glass. "Look, I'm sorry about what happened to them. Really. But those mountains don't care how good your camera is or how many wilderness safety courses you've taken. They'll kill you all the same if you make a mistake." The encounter left Claire unsatisfied but unconvinced of Brooks' involvement. His resentment seemed petty rather than murderous. As her investigation continued, Claire noticed David Lawson's growing interest in her findings. He offered his cabin as a place for her to organize her research away from the hotel where her privacy had been violated. His support seemed genuine, his insights valuable. "I've been reviewing the GPS data," he told her one evening as they compared notes in his living room. "There's something strange about the recorded path. It shows them taking an unusually direct route to Wolverine Ridge, as if they knew exactly where they were going." Claire studied the map where he'd plotted the coordinates. "That doesn't match Kevin's usual hiking pattern. He typically followed established trails, stopping frequently for photographs." "Exactly," Lawson agreed. "This looks more like someone carrying the GPS to a specific destination with a purpose." The implication hung between them. Perhaps the GPS had been planted to support the bear attack narrative. As April turned to May, Claire's resources dwindled. Her leave from the law firm had extended beyond what they considered reasonable, and her savings were running low. Lawson, noticing her growing financial strain, offered her the use of his guest room. "It's the least I can do," he insisted. "Your determination to find the truth is admirable. Too many cases like this get conveniently filed away." Claire accepted gratefully, moving her increasingly complex research materials into his spacious cabin on the outskirts of town. Maps covered the walls, timelines stretched across tables, and witness statements filled folders sorted by credibility and relevance. What she didn't notice was how Lawson studied her research when she wasn't looking, how he subtly guided her at certain theories while dismissing others, or how his eyes lingered on the photographs of Melissa that Claire kept among her documents. She couldn't know that each night after she fell asleep, exhausted from her investigation, Lawson would silently open the door to her room and watch her breathing in the darkness, his expression shifting between tenderness and something far more disturbing. The truth was taking shape in the scattered evidence and overlooked details, but Claire couldn't yet see that the answer she sought was closer than she realized and far more dangerous than she could imagine. Mid-May brought warming temperatures to Banff, the last vestiges of winter retreating up the mountainsides. For Claire Turner, now established in David Lawson's guest room, the changing season mirrored her investigation's evolution. What had begun as a quest to understand a single piece of evidence, the recovered GPS, had expanded into something far more complex. While organizing her research materials one afternoon, Claire discovered a small inconsistency in the timeline she'd constructed. The official report stated that search teams had checked the eastern trails on December 19, 2009, but visitor center logs showed those areas had been closed due to avalanche risk that day. Probably just an administrative error, Lawson suggested when she mentioned it that evening. Records from emergency operations often contain minor discrepancies, Claire nodded, but added the detail to her growing list of irregularities. Individually, each might be explained away. Collectively, they suggested a pattern of misdirection that troubled her increasingly. That night, unable to sleep, Claire slipped from her room to review her documents spread across Lawson's dining table. The cabin was silent except for the occasional creak of timber adjusting to the cool night air. She found herself drawn to the photographs of the GPS device that Dr. Forrester had taken before surrendering it to the RCMP. Under the harsh light of her laptop screen, Claire scrutinized the images. The device's casing showed significant damage consistent with the bear ingestion theory, but something about the pattern struck her as odd. The brakes seemed too clean, the internal components too selectively damaged. Without forensic training, she couldn't articulate exactly what bothered her, but her instincts insisted something wasn't right. Claire startled at a sound behind her, Lawson standing in the hallway, silhouetted against the darkness. "Trouble sleeping?" he asked, his voice gentle. "Just reviewing some details," Claire explained, fighting the irrational unease his sudden appearance had triggered. "Sorry if I woke you." "No need to apologize." Lawson moved into the room, glancing at her computer screen. "The GPS photos again? Something about the damage pattern doesn't look right to me," Claire admitted. "But I'm not an expert on electronics or animal biology." Lawson leaned closer, studying the images. "What specifically concerns you?" "The selective nature of the damage," Claire pointed to the circuit board visible through the broken casing. "The memory chip is damaged just enough to lose most data, but preserve the last recorded location. The tracking components are completely destroyed, but the power system is mostly intact." Lawson's expression remained neutral. "Animals don't consume items with any particular pattern in mind." "Exactly," Claire agreed. "It should be random, but this doesn't look random to me." A slight tension formed in Lawson's shoulders, so subtle Claire might have imagined it. "Perhaps you should consult with an expert," he suggested, straightening. "Someone with forensic experience. I'm planning to send these photos to a colleague in Vancouver who specializes in digital forensics," Claire said, the idea forming as she spoke. "His expertise is environmental crime scenes, but he might have insights." Lawson nodded, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "A fresh perspective could be valuable. Don't stay up too late." After he returned to his bedroom, Claire sat motionless, processing their interaction. Something in Lawson's demeanor had shifted when she mentioned external consultation, a momentary guardedness that seemed disproportionate to the conversation. The following morning, Claire drove into town, ostensibly for supplies but primarily to use the secure internet connection at the public library. She uploaded Forrester's GPS photographs to a secure cloud drive and sent the link to Marcus Wong, a digital forensic specialist who had assisted on several of her environmental litigation cases. While in town, Claire decided to visit Dr. Forrester at his research station. The biologist seemed surprised but not displeased by her unannounced arrival. "I've been meaning to contact you," he admitted, clearing journals from a chair to offer her a seat. "Something's been bothering me about the GPS device." Claire felt a surge of validation. "What specifically?" Forrester removed his glasses, polishing them with the hem of his flannel shirt, a habitual gesture when organizing his thoughts. "I've been collecting and analyzing bear scat for over 30 years. I've found many unusual items, watch bands, jewelry, plastic toys. But I've never seen electronics survive digestive processes with such selective damage." Claire leaned forward. "That's exactly what's been troubling me. After turning the GPS over to the RCMP, I continued analyzing the scat sample," Forrester continued. "The digestive enzymes present were consistent with bear biology, but the surrounding matter showed inconsistencies. Specifically, the vegetation components were not what I'd expect from early spring foraging. What are you suggesting, Dr. Forrester? The biologist chose his words carefully. I believe someone may have constructed the sample, combined bear excrement with the damaged GPS to create the impression it had passed through the animal's digestive system. The implication was staggering. If true, it meant the evidence confirming the bear attack theory had been deliberately fabricated. Have you shared this with Sergeant Wilson? Claire asked. I tried, Forrester sighed. He listened politely but suggested I was overcomplicating the matter. The department considers the case effectively closed. As Claire drove back to Lawson's cabin, her mind raced with implications. If the GPS had been planted, who would have both the knowledge to create convincing evidence and the motive to maintain the bear attack narrative? The list of candidates was disturbingly short. That evening, Claire casually mentioned to Lawson that she'd visited Forrester. He's having second thoughts about the GPS discovery, she said, watching carefully for his reaction. Lawson continued chopping vegetables for dinner, his rhythm unbroken. How so? He thinks the evidence might have been staged, that someone planted the GPS in bear scat rather than it actually passing through an animal. The knife paused momentarily, before resuming its steady rhythm. That seems far-fetched. Why would anyone do that? To reinforce the bear attack theory, Claire suggested. To ensure the case remained closed, Lawson transferred the vegetables to a simmering pot. And who would benefit from that? That's what I'm trying to determine. Their conversation maintained its casual tone, but Claire felt an undercurrent of tension that hadn't existed before. Later, as she prepared for bed, she noticed Lawson checking the locks on doors and windows with unusual thoroughness. Expecting a storm? She asked lightly. Bear activity has increased near town, he replied. Just being cautious. That night, Claire wedged a chair beneath her bedroom doorknob before sleeping. The following morning brought an email from Marcus Wong with his analysis of the GPS photographs. His assessment was unequivocal. Damage patterns inconsistent with biological processes. Circuit damage appears deliberate, targeting specific components while preserving others. High probability of intentional tampering. Claire forwarded the analysis to Dr. Forrester, then began cross-referencing her timeline with new information. A disturbing pattern emerged. Lawson's name appeared consistently at critical junctures of the case, always peripheral but present. He had volunteered for the initial search, focusing on areas away from where the GPS was eventually found. He had treated Robert Thornton for a minor injury the day before Thornton first suggested reclassifying the case. He had been among the first to embrace the bear attack theory publicly. These connections proved nothing but raised questions Claire couldn't ignore. She needed to learn more about David Lawson discreetly. At the town hall archives, Claire requested records related to the medical clinic where Lawson worked. The clerk, recognizing her from news coverage, was sympathetically efficient. Dr. Lawson's been with the clinic since 2004, the clerk mentioned while retrieving files. Came here after working in Montana, I believe. Everyone respects him. He's always willing to help with emergencies, especially backcountry incidents. Claire reviewed staff directories, noting that Lawson had joined the Banff medical community just 5 years before Kevin and Melissa's disappearance. Prior employment verification showed 3 years at a clinic near Glacier National Park in Montana. Before that, his record contained a 2-year gap. At the public library, Claire used a computer terminal to search newspaper archives from Montana. A small item from 2003 caught her attention. Local doctor resigns amid missing equipment investigation. The brief article mentioned allegations that Dr. David Lawson had been improperly signing out medical sedatives but provided no resolution to the matter. Claire's unease deepened. She expanded her search to include missing persons cases in areas where Lawson had worked. 2 separate incidents appeared. A hiking couple who disappeared in Glacier National Park in 2002 and a solo female photographer who vanished in the Banff backcountry in 2007. Both cases were eventually attributed to environmental factors or wildlife encounters. Neither mentioned Lawson, but the pattern was disquieting. As Claire prepared to leave the library, her phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Forrester. "Need to speak with you immediately. Found something critical. Coming to town now." Claire waited at a coffee shop near the library, checking her watch repeatedly as minutes stretched into an hour with no sign of Forrester. When she called his research station, a colleague informed her that Forrester had left abruptly after receiving a call, mentioning only that he needed to check something at Wolverine Ridge before meeting someone in town. Concern mounting, Claire drove to the visitor center parking lot where Forrester's truck should be if he'd gone to the trailhead. She found it empty, the vehicle locked with no sign of disturbance. After reporting her concerns to the front desk ranger, Claire returned to town, increasingly troubled by Forrester's unexplained absence. When she arrived at Lawson's cabin that evening, she found him unusually agitated. "I was worried when you didn't answer my texts," he said, relief evident in his voice. "Cell service has been spotty today." Claire checked her phone, finding no missed messages from him. "I've been in town all day. The service there is fine." "Must be my carrier then." Lawson dismissed the discrepancy with a wave. "How was your research?" "Productive," Claire answered vaguely. "I'm starting to see connections I missed before." Lawson's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Anything significant?" "Potentially. I'm meeting with Sergeant Wilson tomorrow to discuss some concerns." This was a deliberate falsehood. She had no such appointment, but Claire watched carefully for Lawson's reaction. His expression remained neutral, but she noticed his hand tighten around the glass he was holding. "Would you like me to come with you?" he offered. "Wilson can be dismissive of civilian concerns." "I think it's better if I go alone," Claire replied. Professional courtesy between legal practitioners. That night, Claire didn't sleep. Instead, she silently packed her essential research materials into her shoulder bag and prepared for a hasty departure if necessary. The pieces were aligning in a pattern too disturbing to ignore, but she needed more concrete evidence before approaching authorities with her suspicions. Shortly after midnight, she heard Lawson's bedroom door open, followed by the soft tread of footsteps in the hallway. Rather than approaching her room as she feared, the footsteps continued to the front door, which opened and closed quietly. Claire moved to the window, watching as Lawson's figure crossed the moonlit yard to his detached garage. Minutes later, his SUV backed out and headed down the private road toward the highway, headlights extinguished until he reached the main road. This unexpected development presented both opportunity and risk. Claire hesitated briefly before making her decision. If her growing suspicions were correct, this might be her only chance to find evidence. The cabin was silent as she crept from her room. Lawson's bedroom door stood partially open, the space beyond dark and still. Using her phone's flashlight, carefully shielded to minimize visible light, Claire entered. The room was meticulously organized, bed precisely made, clothes hung with almost military precision. A bookshelf held medical texts and wilderness survival guides. Nothing immediately suggested anything sinister until Claire noticed a small safe in the closet, partially hidden behind hanging clothes. Without the combination, the safe remained an unknown quantity. Claire continued her search, carefully checking beneath the bed, behind drawers, and inside the closet's higher shelves. On the top shelf, behind a stack of sweaters, she found a small wooden box. Inside lay a collection of items that stopped her breath. A silver bracelet Claire recognized as Melissa's, a memory card from Kevin's camera, and a small notebook with dates, locations, and cryptic notations. The most recent entry, dated the previous day, read simply, "F becoming problem. W or solution again?" Claire photographed everything with trembling hands before returning the items exactly as she'd found them. Her suspicion had crystallized into certainty. David Lawson was somehow involved in her sister's disappearance, and possibly in Forrester's failure to appear that afternoon. She needed to leave immediately, but as she turned to exit the room, headlights swept across the window. Lawson had returned far sooner than expected. Heart-pounding, Claire slipped back to her room, closing the door silently behind her. She texted Sergeant Wilson at Lawson's cabin. Evidence he's involved in Melissa Kevin case. Possibly Dr. Forrester too. Send help. The message failed to send no signal. Claire remembered Lawson mentioning the spotty service, a claim she dismissed earlier. Now she realized it might have been a warning she'd misinterpreted. The front door opened. Claire quickly positioned herself in bed, feigning sleep. Footsteps approached her door, paused, then continued to Lawson's room. Minutes passed in tense silence before Claire heard a muffled exclamation followed by rapid footsteps returning to her door. This time, the knob turned. Claire abandoned any pretense of sleep, grabbing her bag and phone as Lawson entered, his expression transformed by cold fury. "You've been in my room," he stated, his voice unnervingly calm. "Where's Dr. Forrester?" Claire demanded, backing toward the window. A smile ghosted across Lawson's face. "Experiencing the same wilderness that claimed your sister. He should have stayed focused on his bears instead of questioning my work." "The GPS was planted," Claire said. "You damaged it and placed it in bear scat to close the case." "A masterpiece of misdirection," Lawson acknowledged, his demeanor shifting from the supportive ally she'd known to something entirely different. "Though I'm disappointed it took the authorities so easily. No critical thinking whatsoever." "Why?" Claire asked, desperately seeking both understanding and time. "Why Melissa and Kevin?" Lawson's expression softened with genuine emotion that was somehow more terrifying than his anger. "I first saw Melissa at the visitor center their first day in Banff. She was studying the wildlife migration charts, asking intelligent questions. Unlike the typical tourists, she understood the delicate balance of the ecosystem." His voice took on a dreamlike quality. "When she smiled at me, I felt a connection I hadn't experienced since Eleanor and Glacier Park." The name matched one of the missing hikers Claire had discovered in her research. She fought to keep her expression neutral as Lawson continued. "I followed them, learned their routines. I introduced myself when Kevin suffered a minor cut on their first hike. As a doctor, offering help was natural, expected. They trusted me immediately." His smile turned wistful. "I invited them to see a hidden viewpoint few tourists ever find. Offered them tea from my thermos." The sedative worked quickly. Claire's hand found the bear spray in her jacket pocket as Lawson recounted her sister's final hours with the clinical detachment of a medical report. Kevin required an additional dose. His body mass made the calculations tricky. "I brought them here, to the cellar beneath this very cabin. I explained to Melissa how we would build a life together once she understood our connection. She was ... unreceptive." His expression darkened. "When it became clear she couldn't overcome her misplaced loyalty to Kevin, I had no choice but to release them both into the greater wilderness. A humane end, administered with proper medical supervision." "And you kept souvenirs," Claire said, fighting to control her voice. "Melissa's bracelet. Kevin's memory card. Mementos," Lawson corrected. "Of connections that might have been, had circumstances been different," he sighed. "I've enjoyed your company these past weeks, Claire. You have the same analytical mind as Melissa, the same determination. I had hoped you might eventually understand my work." "Your work?" Claire echoed, inching closer to the window. "Freeing exceptional women from mundane existences," Lawson explained, as if discussing a medical procedure. "Eleanor was first trapped in a stifling relationship with an unworthy partner. Then Andrea in 2007, a photographer with remarkable vision. Melissa in 2009. He tilted his head, studying Claire. "And now you. The pattern has a certain symmetry, doesn't it?" Sisters, reunited through my intervention. Claire's fingers closed around a heavy paperweight on the bedside table. Dr. Forrester suspected the truth. That's why you lured him to Wolverine Ridge. He's currently experiencing the same hospitality I extended to your sister, Lawson confirmed. Though at his age, I doubt he'll last the night. In one fluid motion, Claire hurled the paperweight at Lawson and lunged for the window. Glass shattered as she crashed through, landing painfully on the ground outside. She sprinted toward the trees, Lawson's shouts fading behind her. The forest enveloped her in darkness, branches scratching her face as she ran blindly away from the cabin. The moon provided just enough light to avoid trees, but little else. Claire had no plan beyond escape. Reaching her car was impossible with Lawson between her and the driveway. Behind her, a beam of light cut through the darkness. Lawson's voice called out with the same gentle tone he'd used during their investigation. "Claire, you're heading deeper into wilderness. There's no cell service for miles. Come back, and we can discuss this rationally." Claire changed direction, moving silently through underbrush, using the techniques she'd learned during 3 years of searching these mountains. Her only hope was reaching the main road, still kilometers away. What happened next occurred with the sudden violence of wilderness itself. As Claire navigated a steep slope, the ground gave way beneath her, sending her tumbling into darkness. Pain exploded in her leg as she landed in what appeared to be a narrow ravine. Stunned and injured, Claire forced herself to remain silent despite the agony radiating from what was surely a broken ankle. Above, Lawson's flashlight beam swept across the area where she'd fallen. "Claire? I heard something." His voice echoed in the darkness. "Are you hurt? I'm a doctor. I can help you." Claire pressed herself against the ravine wall, controlling her breathing despite the pain. Minutes passed as Lawson searched the area above, his frustration growing evident in his increasingly agitated movements. "This is pointless, Claire," he finally called out. "These mountains claimed your sister. They'll claim you too if you continue this foolishness. I'm offering you shelter, understanding. No one else cares about the truth the way we do." Eventually, his light receded, though Claire suspected it might be a tactic to draw her out. She remained motionless until the first hints of dawn lightened the eastern sky. With morning came the distant sound of vehicles on the main road and, miraculously, a single bar of cell reception when Claire held her phone toward the sky. Her text to Sergeant Wilson finally transmitted. The response was immediate. "Officers dispatched to Lawson residence. Stay hidden. Search teams en route to your location." Claire's rescue came 3 hours later. A park ranger spotted the ravine where she'd sheltered through binoculars, directing emergency personnel to her location. As they lifted her into a rescue basket, the ranger's radio crackled with an update. Lawson's cabin had been found empty, but a hidden cellar contained evidence linking him to multiple disappearances. Most critically, they had found Dr. Forrester, alive but severely hypothermic, bound in a remote cave near Wolverine Ridge. The investigation that followed revealed the full extent of David Lawson's crimes. Forensic teams discovered human remains buried on his property, at least 5 victims including Kevin Harlow. Records found in a hidden compartment beneath Lawson's floor documented his work in clinical detail, dating back to his time in Montana. The GPS that had led Claire back to Banff had indeed been planted, deliberately damaged by Lawson, and placed in genuine bearscat to create the illusion of animal predation. His detailed journals revealed how he had followed the investigation from the beginning, subtly influencing its direction while maintaining his reputation as a respected community doctor. Lawson himself vanished into the wilderness he knew so intimately. Despite an international manhunt, he remained at large for 11 days before a backcountry hunter discovered his body at the base of a remote cliff. Whether his death was accidental or suicide remained undetermined. For Claire, the truth brought no joy, only the grim validation that her instincts had been correct. The bear attack theory so readily accepted, so convenient for all involved, had been a carefully constructed fiction hiding a far darker human predator. Forrester, after recovering from his ordeal, became an advocate for more rigorous forensic standards in wilderness disappearances. "Nature is often blamed for human evil," he noted in a subsequent interview. "We owe it to victims and their families to distinguish between genuine wilderness tragedies and crimes disguised as such." The remains of Melissa Turner and the other victims received proper burials. The GPS device that had been central to the case was eventually recognized as a textbook example of staged evidence, now used in forensic training programs throughout North America. Claire Turner returned to her environmental law practice, but with a new focus establishing the Melissa Turner Foundation, which provides resources for families of missing persons and advocates for thorough investigations, regardless of jurisdictional challenges or convenient narratives. In Banff National Park, a small memorial now stands near the visitor center, bearing the names of those lost to both natural forces and human malice. Beneath the names, a simple inscription reads, "The wilderness keeps many secrets. Some deserve to be uncovered. The mountains that witness these events remain as they have always been, magnificent, indifferent, and ultimately innocent of the crimes committed in their shadow." The real predator had walked on two legs, hidden behind a mask of concern and respectability, proving once again that the most dangerous creatures in any wilderness are rarely those with fangs and claws.